Hello, my dear friends. Mike Amori, welcome to the Winter 2018 WCA session. I have in front of you the famous four knights position with black ready to walk into the center fork trick, which would happen if they played bishop to c5, and that gives white the opportunity to snap off the pawn on e5. And when you first see this happen, you think that white has blundered because they've taken a pawn with a knight here, and you can see that there's a knight that can take back. And of course, if they do, you can just fork in the middle. I wanted to make you all aware again that it's possible for black, knowing that there's going to be this swap of a pawn for a piece, and then the same for the other team, that black could just take the pawn on this square. It's like, hey, why not get my pawn back on f2? This way, when you take back and then I get my piece back, you'll see that it's equal. But now, at least the white king can't castle, and he's out here in the open. I'm not sure why this didn't happen more in the 1800s, and you'll see why I'm bringing up that time period in a moment. But this is actually pretty good for white. Let me flip the board. I know you guys are very impressed at how quickly I can turn the pieces around without spilling anything. This is actually pretty good for white. It's your move, and most likely you're going to play a move like d4, and that's going to drive this knight from e5 away. And as I've discussed many times in class or on these videos, that the more common, or one of the most common moves, is to just give the king a check, which looks really bad. But if you know the idea of putting your king on g1, white actually has a pretty good game. At first glance, it looks terrible for this rook in the corner, but it's only a matter of time before you play h3. You drive this knight away. In the future, your king can come to h2. You have these two beautiful bishops. Don't forget, how did black make your king get into this corner? Well, he had to give up the dark squared bishop. To do that, your king now, believe it or not, is safe on the dark squares because they don't have a dark square bishop. You do. Once you kick this knight out, your bishop, see this cat down here? That bishop is going to guard all these dark squares. So between having the two bishops, having this beautiful center, white actually has the better of it here. Are they winning? No, I'm not saying they're winning. But me personally, I'd rather be white. Okay, now why did I start with that introduction? Let's take a look at one of Morphy's games. Well, he couldn't take a look at it. Well, for two reasons. He's not here anymore. And the other reason is he played this game blindfold. Let me turn the board back around. That's actually amazing. Knight f3, knight c6. He's playing Louis Paulson in 1857, blindfold. Knight c3, and it's funny, Morphy allows the center fork trick. He plays bishop to c5, and this is not the first time that Paulson did not go for it. I don't know. I've never really heard the reason why. In several of his games, he didn't go for this center fork trick early. He would go for it later if he were castled, but early in these positions, it seemed Paulson didn't like to go for that center fork trick. So instead, he just put his bishop on that normal square onto b5, and then Morphy says, you know what? No center fork trick. I'm going to play the move d6. Okay, after d6, we get the move d4. Now, the 4 o'clock class gave a really nice exhibition on Sunday of something we call the Kaidanov method. We name it after Grandmaster Gregory Kaidanov, who recommended that you set up chess positions and then try to guess the moves that are being played by the opponent. So they did a really, really good job. And you may ask, why would white play this move d4 right now? So aside from hitting this bishop, there could be a problem for white based on this pin. If this pawn can get to d5, then black is going to have to use some real trickery not to lose a piece, because remember, that pawn will be attacking a pinned knight. So to avoid that, black just takes. White takes back, and now there's a tactical threat. You have the knight on c6 being attacked twice. Those of you who play openings like the Scotch Gambit, if you play any kind of two knights defense sometimes, you get this situation where you'll have a knight on d4 attacking a knight here on c6. Twice now. Remember, there's a bishop on b5. When that happens, a very common response from black is to break the pin with bishop d7 and protect the knight. Now, white very often goes in for this trade. They will take the knight off, and black normally will not trade everything, will not take over here, because if you trade everything on c6, black has a slightly broken pawn structure. This is not the end of the world, and black is certainly not losing. I would say this position is pretty equal, but having the bishop off the board, the light square bishop, gives you one less piece to fight with in the middle game. So if you're going to accept the broken pawns, why not accept them when you still have pieces to work with? I hope that makes sense. So let's go back to that position. Here's bishop to d7. You just broke the pin. White takes you. In the game, Morphy takes with the b pawn, keeping the light squared bishop on the board. So now let's see what happens by not allowing white to take. The bishop in this position decided to go to a4. It may not have been the best square for the bishop, but it's not really clear where the bishop belongs. c4 feels like the most active square. Maybe that bishop was afraid to get hit with this pawn move at some point. Could be a lot of different reasons, but bishop to c4 looks like a reasonable square. He didn't choose that. He chose bishop to a4. Now let's pay attention to what happens to this bishop for the rest of the game and the bishop on d7. Okay? Now, if you're playing chess and you're just bringing out your pieces because somebody said to you, you have to bring out your pieces. Yeah, that makes sense, but where and why? Morphy here decides not to put his knight on the more common square f6. Instead, he brings his queen out and threatens mate. Okay, so as I tell you, know how to stop the video. Pause it. What did black play? Okay, I hope you found queen f6. And by the way, if you're watching this on YouTube, most of the time you can just hit your space bar. That will stop and start your video. So queen f6 threatens mate at the top of the board, right here, right? Okay, white castles, no more checkmate, and now Morphy has to continue developing the pieces. The knight on g8 comes to the next move, or next common square, e7. Now, it looks a little strange here, but it's very useful right now. In the event that white ever decides to break in the center, which is something they're going to look to do if your king stays here, even if it means sacrificing a pawn. Having the knight on e7, if this pawn ever pushes, would allow you to take with your queen. Because if you take with the queen and the rook comes here, you'll see that the king and queen are not stuck together by that pin because you have the knight in between. Then the queen might be able to come here and, you'll be a pawn up for black, but you'll be a little bit uncomfortable. However, if you take that pawn with the knight not on e7 with your queen, you're going to get pinned and you'll lose your queen. So the knight on e7 right now, pretty useful. And don't forget, it can move. You see the little maneuver that I'm making here? You're probably not going to rush to do that until your king is secure. Okay, Paulson's turn. Now he gives you a problem. He plays bishop to e3. And here, that move does a couple of things. One, develops his last minor piece. And it's amazing, way back in 1857, these players followed those rules. You have to get the minor pieces into the game. But this is not a random move. If white castles now, you're in big trouble. Big trouble because of bishop takes c5. And you lose a piece. Because if you take back, aside from having this miserable pawn structure, you're going to hang the bishop down here on d7. And now white's completely lost. No good. So after bishop e3, Morphy solves the problem by taking the bishop. When the f pawn takes back, you'll see the rook up here in the corner is attacking your queen. Now, before you stop your video, I'll give you a little hint. When players get tempoed, and that's what's happening here, the white's winning a tempo. The rook on f1's hitting your queen. You have to move her. Don't move her to the first safe square that you see. Try to play the same game. White is telling you, I have the initiative. I have a little bit of pull because I'm hitting your queen. You're going to say to white, okay, I'll move my queen, but when I do, I'll give you a problem. Stop your video. See if you can figure out what black did. Okay, he played the move queen h6. And by going to e6, he targeted a weakness, something that is not protected. And this is a cool position. Everything in white's camp is protected, except for the b pawn and the first e pawn. So white decides to protect it with a move that may not have been best. He played the move queen to d3. Now, I'm saying it's not best. And remember, these players are blindfolded. So the only reason queen d3 had been criticized is it allows Morphy to follow through with his plan. Instead of castling, he played knight g6. Because after that trade, you guys see this trade that happened up here with the bishops? You see how it changed the pawn structure? It not only changed the pawn structure, it permanently weakened this e5 square. So this is sort of like an outpost. For it to be a pure outpost, it would have to be in white's camp. But for me, I'm going to call this an outpost. This is a really good square for the knight. Now the problem is when the knight gets there, it's going to be hitting the queen. And Paulson realized that. And he said, you know what? When that knight gets there, I'm going to have to move Big Mama. And when I do, you're still going to be attacking my e-pawn. So what he did is he took his last piece, this rook up here, and got it into the game. Now, this rook on f1 technically didn't move. It's like he got a free ride when black castled or when white castled, but it's active. It's already in the game. So he took the piece that's done nothing so far, unless you want to protect your a-pawn. You know, if you think that the a-pawn is the most important part of this game, then you should clearly keep it protected. Even though you have the knight there, you know, maybe you can put the bishop here, you can put the queen here, and everybody can guard the a-pawn. Not going to work. You know, walk your king over here. Look at that. I'm being silly, but I have a point. You don't need this rook guarding something that's not important right now in the position. So the rook slides over to e1. And Morphy's like, you know, I'm going to castle, but why not play knight e5? Why not? Let's jump the knight into e5, tempo the queen. Queen goes to e2, and then he just continues his development with castling. Notice that both players have connected the rooks, and every minor piece they have left is in the game. And at this point, Paulson makes a move that, so I would say, gives Morphy a pretty clear plan. I don't think he was very happy with the idea that this bishop could come to g4, annoy the queen, number one, or the knight could come to g4 with mating threats. If the knight comes to g4, you're going to have an issue on the h2 square. You're going to have to move one of these pawns anyway. So Paulson says, you know what? I know what you're going to do. So I'm going to prevent all of it and play the move h3. Okay. Playing h3 stops those two threats. But what it does is creates a pawn structure where one of the pawns is sticking out. Morphy knows this. And what he sees, I guess he really could see this position, is this idea. throwing this g-pawn up the board, getting it to g4 with the idea of opening up some lines against the king. Now, this is a pawn storm with kings on the same side of the board. This is another reason why this game is taught a lot, because kids who learn about opposite side castling hear very often that you shouldn't move the pawns in front of your king when the king is castled on the same side, because look what's happening to the black king. As this pawn moves up the board, this can be very dangerous. And guess what? They're absolutely right, but every position is different. Morphy knows that as this g-pawn comes up the board, it's going to be exposing the king. But he plays a really cool move. To me, this is like a major attacking move. He plays king h8. And when you see king h8, you're going to like, hey, Mike, like, what's up with that? That's not an attacking move. Yes, it is. Because it's preparing not only the g-pawn coming up the board, not only getting the king out of the way of these holes that are going to appear, it opened up a square. You see the g8 square? I remember making a video for chesskid.com where I told those kids, whenever you see a master or a grandmaster move a piece and it seems mysterious to you, always ask where the piece was and if opening that hole means anything. What do you guys think? You think black is going to use that hole at some point? Yeah, let's see. Paulson played knight to d1. His thinking is, okay, I kind of have a feeling that you played king h8 to start attacking me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my knight to f2. Two reasons. One, I can fight you for the g4 square. And number two, from f2, I might be able to hop to d3 with the idea of challenging this really, really strong knight. Remember this bishop over here on a4? Right now, it's in a totally different theater. You're watching a movie. You know when you go to the movie theater and they have 4 theaters in one? Well, pretend chess, you know, you have a theater over here, one over here, blah, blah, blah. What's this bishop doing over here? Now, this guy is kind of on the same side of the board as this bishop. It's, I guess you could say it's on the queen side, but you see where it's pointing? Yeah, that's a big issue because this is a minor piece that can attack this king. This is a minor piece. I don't know what to say. Okay, g5. Why not? Knight f2, and Morphy can push the g-pawn again, but he wants to push it with more strength. Rook to g8, preparing the g4 push. At this point, Paulson decides to go right after the black knight. And I'm thinking, you know, if he takes this knight, if you decide to take this knight, I don't know, they'll probably take back with the pawn, just securing their center. No more double isolated pawns. And here, g4 doesn't quite have the same bite that it did a second ago without this knight on this square. So Morphy's, no thank you. I don't think that trade helps me. I'm just going to play g4. Paulson takes the knight, and you better take back. If you don't, you see what this knight's about to do? Yeah, everything is hanging. The f-pawn, the bishop, and it's really bad. You need to take it. So he does. So the pawn structure has now really been shattered on the black side. But after h takes, black is really set to strike. You can take with the rook, which is really strong, but taking with the bishop keeps the G line open and wins a very important tempo against the queen. The queen goes to f2. When it goes to f2, there is a positional threat. What do I mean by a positional threat? Black is getting tons of pressure against this king. This rook is in the game. Once it lifts, and believe me, it's going to want to lift, this rook is going to slide over, and you're going to have 4 major pieces, or 3 major and 1 minor, attacking this king. If that happens to you in a game and you're the one getting attacked, get the queens off the board. Why did he play queen f2? He would love to play queen f6. Get those queens off the board. Morphy says no. Rook g6. And when you see this game, you're going to be like, well, aren't you ignoring this pawn down here? Yes, Morphy was. Because when you take it, it allows black to hit you with bishop to e6. And here, white is in trouble. It was necessary for this queen to come back and defend the king. Instead, the queen decided to snap off this pawn on c7, which is a huge mistake. It really needed to come back to f3. But I think, you know, white's already in trouble. Moves like bishop h3 are coming. This a-rook is about to join the party, and it's really bad. But he took the pawn on c7. And legend has it here that Morphy announced mate in 5. And after some thinking, Paulson actually resigned. You can stop your video. Black to play, checkmate, force it. Okay, grandmasters, rook takes pawn. Awesome. King has no choice, must accept the rook. And now there's more than one way to do this. The one that I like is queen h3, taking advantage of the bishop's help, king f2, and you do not want this king to come to e2. You do not. Because if it gets in there, he may be able to hide here for a while, and you really don't want him getting to c1. Maybe he's maybe he's on his way to c1 to protect the a pawn. Do not let him go here. I've shown this game so many times, and I've seen kids actually play this move with black to prevent the king from coming, and now it's white who's going to win this game. So why not? Let's go. This is a long video, but we're here to do some work. White to play and win. Yep. Ouch. Check. You come here. Oh, remember this bishop up here on a4? Yeah, don't forget, it can move. Check. And, you know, if you move your king to f8, how funny is this? The king that was being attacked just kind of takes a step over and checks with this rook, and you have to give away all of your pieces not to get mated here. And then once you give them away, you'll get mated. How cool is that? Be careful, my friends. So after king f2, do not play bishop g4. Just queen h2 does the same job, and the king has no choice but to come to f3, and now we bring our rook in the game. The queen politely blocks the check, and the rook politely takes the queen. Thank you very much for a nice game. Okay, there are a lot of notes in the update. This is a tough assignment. Do it. You'll be a master by the time you're done. I guarantee it. Sort of. All right, see you next week.